I'm Jim Check. You're watching Kelowna Now. I have with me Ian Burns, all the way there in Ottawa. A nice, beautiful day in Sorry, I'm a little under the weather, so I'm going to see if I can get through this. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to head home because I've got a bit of a cough there. So I'm going to do my best, though.
It's like a Victorian infirmary today, isn't it? Because I've got a horrible itchy cough still as well. I think
Yeah.
we're representative of this flu epidemic that we're suffering from in Canada.
Neither sleet nor snow, no dark of night, eh? Will stop Ian and I from doing our regular show, the really big show. Even though some people would like us to stop, I think, right? We're getting some positive comments and then some news comments. I think somebody said I should be fired yesterday. So there's that. So there you go.
We'll see. We'll see about that.
Yeah. Justin Trudeau, they're in court. Prorogation, it's in day two. I listened to a few people saying that day one they thought was favorable, that it looked like, the Trudeau's justification wasn't that well. Even the lawyer had some. When the Chief Justice asked, said, so your position is the government was functioning? And the lawyer's response was, I don't have a position. So, yeah, so I guess it'd be remains to be seen. And then they said, what are the limits for prorogation? And they said there is none. So again, not a lot of hope that something will happen out of this. But any
I
thoughts on
think
that,
that's
Ian?
strict. I think that's strictly true, isn't it? At least my understanding. Well, that's not actually completely correct, is it? That there are no limits. It's supposed to. The limit is supposed to be that Parliament has to sit once every 12 months, and that seems to be the only real limit when it
Well,
comes to
this was the
prorogation. But I mean, like we've said, this is a royal power. This is a
yeah.
power that has it's come down to Parliament and down, ultimately to Justin Trudeau after all these centuries from the English monarchs, from the absolute rulers of England, who, if you know your history, Magna Carta and all that, and all the lords who feuded with the king and eventually forced King John to concede certain powers, and then that's when you start to get parliamentary democracy, or the very beginnings of that. That's what Canada system is. It comes from that era ultimately, and prorogation is the king's power. So that's why it's so kind of like it really does seem a little bit crazy, doesn't it? It's like so absolute, and it's like from another era, and that's kind of because it is. It's Justin Trudeau exercising the power of the King of England, basically. So in that sense, as is the case with lots of things in Canada's constitution and Britain's constitution, there aren't really many limits. There's not much that can actually be done because it's royal prerogative.
And then you were saying before we went on that all the premiers, and including LeBlanc, they're representing Trudeau, I guess, in Washington. Maybe give us a little update on that.
Yeah, they all went down. They're all back. They're back now. I mean, but they were all there in Washington D.C. to try and beg, or I can't imagine that they were trying to threaten. Probably more begging to be excluded from economic punishment that the Americans have in mind for Canada. Um, and that, well, the main story that came out of that in sort of a news sense was David Eby said uh, that they discussed how Canada will never become a state of the US. And then the person that they met with, who was a representative of the administration, then went on Twitter and said, we didn't agree that Canada wouldn't become a 51st state, just
Yeah.
to just to
And
clarify. So there's a kind of contradiction of EB. That seems to be the main thing that's come out of this. But from my perspective, and what we just chatted about there, what I find most interesting is, for the first time ever, the most powerful people in Canada, all of them, really, except for the Prime Minister who was in Brussels at the time. But essentially, every single powerful person in Canada, all the premiers, were in Washington, D.C. And who was there to meet them? Some absolute nobody, a completely inconsequential person, like basically just like a kid, like an absolute nobody. That's who they met. I mean, that is humiliating to think that that's what happened. And not only that, but this nobody then went on Twitter and mocked the Canadian premiers. So it's kind of it's a terrible state of affairs. It's such a humiliation, I think.
Yeah, it doesn't put us in good stead. And steel is definitely the one that's in the news lately. The steel tariffs. And then Justin Trudeau did have a comment on steel. Here, we're going to play this clip for you.
We import more steel than the Americans import. Sorry, we have a significant trade surplus. The Americans have a significant trade surplus with us on steel, which means we buy steel from them, they buy steel from us.
Crystal clear?
Yeah, economics not something he likes, is it really? I mean, he's said that as much. He said as much as that, I should say, over the years, and you can tell, can't you? You can
He
tell
has said
he doesn't know what a surplus is by the looks of
he
it.
has said that he does not worry about the economy.
Yeah, it isn't good, frankly, is it? But I mean, to be fair to him, let's think of a defense. I would say that my defense of our dear leader there would be he speaks an awful lot and he has to process a huge amount of information. Like every hour of every day, he has to learn and master new things. And it must, in fairness, be very difficult to constantly be on
Well,
camera and talk about things that you just learned about 20 minutes
I,
ago or something. So
I think you should
maybe that's the
understand one of our
defense.
I think you should understand one of our most important industries. So, I mean,
Yeah, I would be inclined to agree, but that could be the defense, perhaps, that he's under a lot of pressure or something. Poor fella.
well, I mean, his TikTok videos look pretty good there. It looks like he's having a good time in Brussels. Um,
Yeah.
that a Holly Doan story from Blacklocks, that Google tax that Canadian media was counting on now looks doubtful as well because there was supposed to be $100 million coming to, or $500 million coming through, and that's that Bill C-18 is wrapped up in that too. This Facebook fight that blocks us from accessing Facebook and Instagram, and then like perhaps getting some of this money from Google, and it looks like the Americans are going to fight back on that. Trump called that yesterday an anti-American trade barrier, and he said he's going to fight all trade barriers, and only America should be allowed to tax American firms, and then so that probably is going to be something that is like likely not going to happen now either. And I'm sure Google and Facebook are going to hide behind that for sure.
Yeah, the Americans have been annoyed about this for a long time. It's part of their kind of economic imperialism, where the presidents go to bat for these companies. They've been doing this for ages because obviously, and usually it's in the context of the European Union and also Britain actually, and sort of the American presidents acting on behalf of these tech giants who are upset about certain taxes and certain restrictions on what they do in Europe. But Canada often tends to go along with what Europe does. It either copies them or just naturally also wants to do those sorts of things. And yeah, that's what the digital services tax and all that is, and that's what like also the Online News Act you could say is in that sort of
Yeah, because it says that
in that mold.
Facebook, Google, and Amazon were required to register. It was based on your revenue, and I'm sure X will have to register at some point too. And so now with the White House saying that there's going to be counter tariffs to all tariffs, that looks doubtful that Canadian media will be getting that money. Um, and
Yeah.
for us, I would hope that it removes Bill C-18 and allows us to have that audience back. I don't think media should be getting funding from the government, and media should stand on its own. But also, we shouldn't have the government suppressing our audience that we earned over 10 years.
Well, it's also a very questionable. We're going to talk about it later, I gather, what JD Vance just said in Munich, which I think is like an enormous and consequential speech that people are going to look back on in the future. That's my initial sort of feeling about that speech. If you think about what he said there when he lectured the Europeans, we can also basically infer that he was also lecturing Canada, I would say. It doesn't look good when in Canada you can't see news stories on the biggest social media platform in the world, which also happens to be American. That doesn't look good. And JD Vance lectured the Europeans about censorship and about a lack of kind of freedom of expression and freedom to get information where you want to get it. That it looks very, very bad. And I can only imagine that that means that there's going to be pressure from the Trump White House on
And
the Online News Act. Because
and
that,
we've done.
I mean, we are like famously or infamously, we're one of the sort of few Western countries. Well, we're the only Western country where you can't get news on Facebook. We're one of the few Western countries where something of this kind is happening, where a whole kind of medium for accessing information is just blocked in this country.
And then the Trudeau government said that they would never bow down to Facebook and Meta and advertise on there. And then just recently they started advertising on it because they said they realized that Canadians get their news on the social media platform, and the only way for them to get it on there, because news is blocked, which they blocked, is for them to advertise. So they're pumping out this Buy Canadian, and at the same time, they're spending money on American platforms while they choke off independent media.
Yep, and very, very few news organizations are bothering to devote many resources to that. And I wonder why that is. Could it possibly have something to do with them being funded by the Liberal government? I don't know, but maybe. Maybe it's just a coincidence.
Another Holly Doan's Blacklock story. A taxpayer-funded court challenges program subsidized Liberal causes 96% of the time. And it says that it rarely ever financed a conservative cause.
Again, I mean, as I often, when I read Blacklock stories, I mean, it's great that they do it. It's great that they actually get the receipts, so to speak. But often when I read it, it's like, I'm never surprised, I would say. It just confirms what I already assumed. And this, in a way, kind of, this is what the is happening in America with the USAID, the hostility towards that organization by the Trump administration. It's hostility to taxpayer money being used to fund left-wing causes or liberal causes. I mean, I assume most people can understand why that would upset the Republican Party in the United States. But what's less discussed is that a similar phenomenon is observable here in this country. A lot of the aid organizations, a lot of the kind of taxpayer-funded or subsidized groups are fundamentally liberal with a small L, but that tends to correspond to the liberal with a big L as well. So
Yeah.
there you have it.
I would advise the person that says it's blocked because Meta won't pay up to go and read all the stories we've done and look what it's done to media in Canada. It's actually devastated media. The ones that don't get this subsidy and the ones that do, all of them are suffering and Canadians are getting less access to news. And during times of crisis, like in our wildfires, they're not getting that access, and community leaders are scrambling to try to get that information out there by ripping the news from news sites and posting it up there. And it's not a good situation for media outlets in Canada. But there's lots of stories we've done on it, tons. So you can go ahead and read it. Justin Trudeau yesterday congratulated the leader of a terrorist organization responsible for a coup. There's a lot of people putting this story out too, including this is CTV that pushed this out there. It seems odd, right? Like he's still listed as a terrorist here in Canada, and Trudeau is congratulating him.
Well, yeah, it is funny, but again, devil's advocate here to defend our prime minister. Lots of other Western countries are in the same situation, and it kind of, for me anyway, this doesn't say anything particularly about Justin Trudeau, from my perspective anyway. It says a lot more about just the West in general, really. And if you've ever like rolled your eyes when you've heard like Noam Chomsky rant on about the West, or if you've ever rolled your eyes when you've heard sort of like revolutionary or terrorist organizations or whatever in the Middle East, places like that, when they whine and whine and whine about the West and how duplicitous they are. Just look at this. Look at the absolute state of this situation where the Western powers all designated this group as Islamist terrorists. That is to say, an organization that murdered people, including civilians, in an effort to create a theocracy, a sort of a society run by and for the religious, basically. That's what this group is. Like, really foul group. And now that this group has come along and destroyed one of their enemies and you know successfully pulled off a coup in Syria and got rid of the Assad family, Now they get phone calls and they're congratulated, and I mean they've even met with Western leaders, and they're great now. They're our friends now. That kind of hypocrisy explains, I think, why so many organizations and so many individuals as well treat the Western promises the same as like a handful of cow dung, because it's absolutely worthless. What the West promises is worthless, and this shows it. Here we are, the Prime Minister of Canada having a chummy conversation with the leader of an organization that is still now designated as a terrorist group by Canada. I mean, it's just ludicrous. It's laughable.
Canadian pipelines. A lot of people don't understand this, but here's a map that really shows you the Canadian pipelines. The little black box at the top there, that's the Northern Gateway pipeline that was rejected, and well, they stopped doing it because liberals, environmental stuff on it. And then there's the Energy East one that's on the right side there, little black box you see there, and that was canceled as well. And these are all during the Liberal government. And then the Keystone one that runs into the south there, that was Joe Biden that canceled that one. And then so that really stopped access to our seaports for the one that did complete is the TMX, which takes very little of I think it's less than like around 5% of our oil and gas to our Vancouver port, but a lot of that oil and gas goes to the US as well. So you can see how the stuff from Alberta actually has to go into the US, the Enbridge one, and then before it comes back up, right? So there you go. That's where we've been put. After 10 years, we've rejected these pipelines that could give us access to outside markets. And then again, we'll talk about it later, we saw the Japanese come and they did a deal with Trump the other day. That deal they offered to us 2 years ago. We refused it. And the Prime Minister of India, we're going to get to it, was there yesterday and got a deal as well. So this is what the carbon tax looks like for lots of businesses. And this is, so if you look at it, you go to the next slide there. The federal carbon charge is more than the gas. It's $24.93 for the carbon charge and $23.03 for the gas. And then of course there's a delivery charge and then a cost adjustment charge. So the actual gas in there, the gas in there that the person's buying is $23.03. And the total bill, $6,500 for that $2,300 of the gas. The rest of it is taxes and delivery charges and that.
Yeah, I've seen a few of these receipts.
Yeah, but and then they wonder, like, I mean, there's not like there's a lot of alternatives for businesses, right? To burn anything but LNG. And the same thing goes for trucks, like, and trains that, like burn diesel, that go across Canada. Like, what is their alternative? What should they be doing instead? So we're punishing all Canadians with a compounding carbon tax, and this really highlights it. So there you go.
Gruesome.
Now we just talked about it. This is a tweet from the Prime Minister Modi of India. I watched that press conference with him and Donald Trump. They're talking about energy to education, and they're talking about buying lots of LNG and different things. And India has been a very protectionist market. They've had huge tariffs there, right, too. And so they're working on ways to even out the tariffs, I guess. But I mean, it was a respectful visit, not like we're getting treated like, like the worst cousin or something like that, the bad cousin at the party. And here's India, that's a very protectionist market. That's part of the BRIC nations to top it off, right? That we're actually going to pull out of the US dollar thing. They're part of the BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and they got like a great welcome at the White House.
And bear in mind as well, India, I think a lot of people just automatically assume that India is like pro-Western and is a friend of the West. They're not really. They're pretty neutral. They look after themselves, and they always have. That's where the term third world comes from, really. It's like they were the third way during the Cold War. They didn't want to be on either side, even though they were actually quite friendly to the communists, but that's another discussion. But bear in mind that India has been funding Russia's war in Ukraine by buying the oil that the Americans came out and said nobody, and the Europeans as well, for whatever that's worth, came out and said nobody buy any Russian oil and don't support this Russian war in Ukraine. The Indians obviously just said, shut up. Like, obviously, I'm going to buy this oil. And then they sold it on at a profit. So they bought it, sold it to other countries at a profit. So it's kind of like arbitrage based on their sort of the moral position that they'd adopted. But then they also have really like pretty lucrative contracts for weapons with the Russians. So they
Yeah,
actually have a reasonably close relationship with the Russians.
they
And
do.
then on top of that, bear in mind that the Indian state, the Indian government, is accused of ordering the murder of people in the United States as well as Canada, if you remember that story. So
Mhm.
India is not exactly like it's not going to win any best bud awards when it comes to their relationship with the US, and yet Trump is all smiles, ready to make a deal. I
They
mean,
got
India's a very important country, particularly when it comes to the plan for containing China in this century. But still, that's funny, isn't it? I mean, you have to note that. Whereas Canada's been nothing but servile and friendly to the United States for decades now, and is treated with supreme contempt.
and that's why I keep going back to Canada needs to have an election and elect a leader so we can actually have a leader show up to the United States because I think that's what he's saying. I'll meet with a leader, but not the leader that's already resigned. So, and that's why we're getting like not even treated fairly. And one of the comments that probably riles up a lot of people there in Modi's speech there is that he said, he loves the MAGA movement, and then he actually says that India is going to have a MIGA movement, so make India great again. So there you go. So people get ready to lose your minds because now there's a MAGA and a MIGA.
I think as well, sorry, on that note, I would just say, because you're talking about how the Canadian leadership and then comparing it to the Indian leadership, I have to just say they are smarter. Their leaders, the Indian leadership is more intelligent, I think, and has approached the US relationship in a much more intelligent way than can be said for Canada and actually for European countries who have decided to like tap into the ideas and the sort of slogans from 10 years ago from his last presidency.
Oh,
Whereas the Indians and the Japanese actually and some other visitors to the White House, they've been so smart and they've just like they've patted Trump on the head and said, "Oh yeah, what a great guy you are. Let's make India great again," or whatever. They're saying what they need to say to please Trump, which I
yep.
think is which is the smarter option for a country that's like a fraction of the has a fraction of the power of the United States and wants something from America. What's the way to approach it? I would say the Indian approach is the better one.
I just want to say 2 years ago we could have had this deal too. We could have had this deal with India on oil and gas and LNG, and we could have had the
Oh yeah,
Japanese deal.
that's another area. Yeah. The leadership's attitude to natural resources is a whole sort of series of books, isn't it, by itself?
Tamara Litch, a Canadian hero to some and a villain to many others, has a tweet out there too, because today is the anniversary of the Emergencies Act. So she's displayed some images. Do you have that image there? Rommel lost it. He was scared to put it up, I guess, somewhere. Um, there you go.
He's got
So
other plans to celebrate Valentine's Day rather
there you
than
go.
this.
It is Valentine's Day. We should have said that. We love you.
Yeah,
And I
what else
love
can we
you.
say? We
And
love
I
you.
love you, Ian. There you go. We love each other. If nobody's going to
Definitely.
love us, we love you.
And we also love abusing the Canadian Constitution to arrest people outside of Parliament. So that's also great, isn't it?
A dark day in Canadian history. To some, though, still celebrate that day as like a day of justice. But, it's been said that Mark Carney was instrumental in ordering that, too, and suggesting that. And he's even said that when he was in Cologne here, and it's been stolen from us many times. The clip is all over the place about he says he will use the Emergencies Act again. So, not for that, he's saying he's using it for the energy. But I don't think it's an oil and gas energy program.
That's
Here's
a
what we talked.
funny precedent, that though, isn't it? Like, I mean, just think about that. What if Pierre Poilievre says that as well? Then
Yeah.
we've got two leaders of both parties, both main parties, who say that they're going to basically abuse the Constitution to get through their sort of ideas. I mean, that's pretty strange territory that we're headed into.
And the same people that ridicule Trump for his executive actions are willing to do the
Yeah,
same thing.
indeed.
I guess it's only when when somebody else is doing that it's bad. If you're doing it, it seems like a great idea. Here's JD. Sorry. Here's JD Vance with his lecture for the Europeans and us, I guess.
And expressing opinions isn't election interference. Even when people express views outside your own country, and even when those people are very influential. And trust me, I say this with all humor, if American democracy can survive 10 years of Greta Thunberg scolding, you guys can survive a few months of Elon Musk. But what no democracy, American, German, or European, will survive is telling millions of voters that their thoughts and concerns, their aspirations, their pleas for relief are invalid or unworthy of even being considered. And expressing
So yeah, so he goes on to say that if you're running in fear of your own voters, there's nothing in America can do for you.
I think that's a huge warning to all of America's allies, or certainly all the countries in NATO. I'd say that's a massive, like, you are on watch, be careful. Because he's basically saying if European countries and Canada as well, if they continue with the censorship regimes that have been installed under the kind of with the watchword of misinformation, or, that they set themselves up to try and, because he mentioned that as well. He referred to that as a Soviet era term, and that's given as the justification, isn't it? We're all familiar with that.
Yeah. Justin has
He's
used it.
basically saying if you keep up this regime, you keep doing these things, America will not be there for you. We're not going to be friends with you. And I think that's huge. I think that's almost like when presidents or when administrations in the US have certain policies like this, usually foreign policies, they get called doctrines. So there's like the Truman Doctrine, for example, and the Carter Doctrine. I almost feel like this could evolve into being the Trump Doctrine, which is if you turn away from liberal values, and by liberal values I mean in the old sense, like freedom of speech and democratic principles and so on, then America is not going to be your friend, and you're on your own, and you can you can deal with it by yourself. Because he sort of said America defends you, and you try and defend yourselves with your military and whatnot, and yet increasingly it's not evident why that's happening. What are they defending? What is America actually defending in Europe, like in terms of values? So I think that's a huge warning, and that also, you know, that applies here. That applies to Canada. If Canada, just what we were talking about, the Emergencies Act, things like that, and also the quite draconian response to COVID, and when people said things about like the lab leak theory and all the rest of it, which has since been vindicated and ended up getting into trouble. He's kind of saying like, if you're going to do that, America isn't going to help you, And that's, to hear those words, America's not there for you. That's like a death sentence for a lot of
So,
Western countries that depend on the US.
I mean, if you can go back and play the clips of Justin Trudeau, it's a sentence he uses in almost every one of his things, and it's two things: misinformation, disinformation, and climate change. Those three things are almost in every speech he makes, and he ties everything back to that misinformation, disinformation, and climate change. And that's why
Yeah,
we're here 10 years later. That's why we're here.
and there's been a trend over the last 10 years, at least last 10 years, of assuming that the old principles of a liberal democracy can be violated to protect the democracy from misinformation, whether that's funded by Russia or misinformation about COVID or far right misinformation, whatever it is, whatever sort of enemy is suggested, it's used then to violate these principles. Number one, I would say, being freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and I just feel this is almost like this is blowback, as the CIA call it. This is like they've pushed and pushed and pushed for a very long time, very controversially, and now people who are very upset about that are in the White House. the most powerful people in the world, and that changes things. I think that's very concerning. I think particularly for the Liberal Party, because if they're going to win this election and Mark Carney is going to be the Prime Minister, they're going to have to really think about their approach to liberal values like freedom of speech. They're going to have to figure something out because they might end up being quite severely punished by the Americans if they don't get it right.
Now, Jagmeet Singh there just today put out a tweet there says, and he used one of Donald Trump's lines: if Trump uses tariffs against Canada, there'll be hell to pay. I'm just not sure what authority he has to bring hell onto anybody. Although he's done that.
Well, that's why he's saying it, isn't it? Because he doesn't have any authority.
But yeah, a lot of people would say that he has wreaked hell on people for the last 10 years because he's held this government up.
Yeah, he's domestically and in terms of like the political wrangling, he's had a lot of power. But in terms of like being able to actually threaten the United States or whatever, I don't think anyone's going to take him seriously. And I'm not convinced that Donald Trump knows who Jagmeet Singh is.
Yeah, but he's
I would
likely,
suggest he probably doesn't know who he is.
if you look through it, he's likely the most powerful person in Canada in the last 5, 6 years.
Yeah, he's the kingmaker, isn't he? As they used to say in old like medieval rebellions and whatnot. He's the one with the keys to the castle, but he isn't the king himself. He's like the eminence gris, as they say.
And then our military, we've talked about this for the last few days. Our military in tough, like we got a depleted force, and we pay. I think the starting salary is in the $43,000 range, where a bureaucrat makes way more than that, and they don't even have to go to work. And like you said the other day, we actually ask our people not just to put their lives on the line, but we ask them to kill strangers, which is a lot more than you're ever asking a bureaucrat. I think lots of times a bureaucrat will get upset if there's no milk or cream for their coffee, whereas we're putting these young men and women in harm's way. And asking to, and I just want to play this clip because there's a lot of pride in the U.S. military right now. They're getting record signups, and we're not. And this is a clip from the Raptor out of the U.S. and just to show you how we need to bring pride back to Canadian military. Just a reminder to everybody, we live under that umbrella.
Yeah, it's true. We don't have the military capability to protect ourselves, which is why
We've
Trump keeps saying we should
we've
be annexed. That's his justification to annex us, apparently.
we've neglected our military for a long time, and it's a proud military too, because in the Second World War, per capita, Canada contributed more soldiers in that fight than anybody. And we were in some of the worst places, storming the beaches of Normandy and different places. There's a lot of pride in the Canadian veterans, and they've been neglected, and we treat our military very poorly. Chrystia Freeland says she's going to give them 50% raise, and she's going to, look after veterans, the homeless veterans. And I remember still that town hall when Justin Trudeau should apologize for that still today when the person asked for a wheelchair, and he said they just don't have the money for that. And
Not a good one. Not one of his better gaffes, that, is it?
not a good look.
No. But yeah, I mean, it is very important. I think Canada should this used to be the case. If you read 20th century Canadian history, the military used to be very celebrated, but I feel like now it isn't. But you're right, it really should be, particularly the Second World War, where it wasn't just military support, but it was also, like we were discussing the other day, it was Canadian wheat from, food and supplies from the prairies, basically, that kept the British alive while they were the only people that resisted the Nazis, or
And a
just
very
about the only ones anyway.
and a very little known fact for the two hydrogen bombs that were dropped in Japan to end that war, that heavy water was made in Trail, BC, at the Caminco plant.
Yeah, that's another thing. That's another, for me, I think that is the most like um, despicable betrayal possibly in the history of the Western world, was when the Americans, with the assistance of the British and the Canadians, um, constructed those bombs. And then after they dropped them and the war ended, said, "You're not getting them. These aren't for you. We're not going to share this technology with you. It's our technology." I mean, a repugnant, vile betrayal. But the Americans also betrayed the British during the Second World War while the Canadians were helping. So the Canadians helped pretty selflessly,
Yeah.
gave
We
the
got some
lives
of
of
the
their
we got some of the worst
soldiers.
we got some of the worst beaches to go at because we were, like the Americans and the British were making the plans, and the Canadians were used as, some of the break points in some of those beachheads.
Yeah, and that was true in the First World War as well. They were referred to as the shock troops of the Empire, weren't they? As in shock troops, like the ones that go and break the lines of the enemy. They were known for that. But I mean, it's very important. Like the Canadians were vastly more generous and loyal and helpful to the cause in the Second World War than the Americans. Lest we forget, the Americans didn't even come into the war until 1942 anyway, and that was when they were attacked by the Japanese. They didn't sort of voluntarily come and assist, and all the assistance that they said that they gave, like Lend-Lease and so on, to the British was, it would make Trump blush. They were very, very transactional. The British had to give gold and wealth and even land to the Americans in exchange for like crap old ships and things like that. So, the Americans pat themselves on the back for their assistance in the Second World War to the British, even though it was that was not a proud moment, I don't think, for the Americans. I think it was actually quite repulsive the way that they behaved, while the Canadians behaved in an exemplary fashion, and we never hear about it. It should be shouted from the rooftops, I think.
Yeah, I mean, somebody just posted there and said we spent a record amount. I'm not sure if that's true, 27 billion on military spending. I think you should look at the state of our military, not just the amount of money we spent. We bought two old submarines. This is a while back from the British, and they both lit on fire. They were on fire on their way back from Britain, and then we tried to get our money back from Britain, and Britain said like it had a bumper warranty on it, right? Like as soon as it left our harbor, those are yours.
That's taking a page out of the Americans' book. I mean, the British also have a very strange military situation where they're very dependent on the Americans for quite a lot of things, and there are examples of that sort of thing there as well. I guess it's like the last person that's caught holding the bag is the ones that get screwed over.
So the big leadership race is going to happen here right away, and Ruby Dalla already getting kind of the she's not going to because she can't speak French, so she's not allowed to have a translator at the upcoming French debate in Montreal.
So what so she won't be there then, or is she just going to speak English?
I mean, she won't understand the question, I guess, unless she uses her Google
Yeah, I was going to say
Translate or something.
that's what I would do. Get ChatGPT out or something, just translate live like that,
Like
digital
we've been saying,
translation.
she's the true outsider in this, and they're doing their best to make sure she's that, right?
Yeah. I mean, that is very, I've always found that peculiar, that necessity to speak two languages if you want to reach the top in Canada. I mean, in a certain sense, it makes sense, but then also it doesn't make sense at all because Canada's not. It's called a bilingual country, but it isn't a bilingual country. I think that's false. Most most people in English speaking Canada only speak English, or Hindi or some other language like that. They don't speak French. So as a consequence, you're excluding the majority of the population from positions of power. That's no way to run a democracy, is it?
Nope. Somebody's wrote on here too. We're trying to do talks about some of these comments that Trump failed to thank our firefighters. I'm not sure if he did or didn't, because I mean I don't follow everything he says. But Canadians have been down there fighting fires in the U.S. and including we did an interview with Colson Aviation. They do all their work Not in Canada. They have no contracts in British Columbia. They're the largest wildfire aviation company in the world with the largest fleet. And they have zero contracts with the BC government. They do all their work in Oregon, Washington, South America, Australia, and all that stuff. So it's right there on the island. And the famous Mars bomber was theirs. It's now in the museum. And it gets zero contracts in British Columbia. So
And
there's
he's not
that.
happy about it, is he? The fella that you interviewed, he
Yeah,
was
so you can go
quite
back and watch.
displeased. Well, he didn't know. He didn't know
Yeah.
why. He wasn't given a reason.
You go back and watch that interview, and then they were here. They had their helicopter here a couple of years ago. Their largest helicopter, like at 5 times the payload. This is from memory. That the other helicopters working the fires, the last big fire we had in the Okanagan, and it never left the tarmac there. It was on standby, but they never put it into the field.
Yeah, it's quite sad, isn't it? As for whether Trump's thanked the firefighters or whatever, I mean, I also don't know because he's always on camera, but I mean, I'm not aware. I haven't seen
Yeah.
him do that. But I would also say that, like, in spirit, at least, like in general, no, he hasn't been grateful, has he? Because he's treating Canada like, like an unloved stepson or something like that. He's treating Canada with
And I mean,
contempt, as we
some of
discussed
the
earlier.
some of the officials in the United States blame this treating Canada like the way we're being treated right now on Trudeau's disrespect for Trump and its payback. But I mean, like, you shouldn't make a whole nation suffer because of your dislike for somebody that did something that's already resigned. Like, if Elon
Yeah.
Musk has a conscience, maybe he can, say like that's enough because he's a Canadian as well. So, and they like take your knee off our throat. How's that? Instead of like threatening with hell to pay, we just like take your knee off our throat and recognize that we've been there for you all the time and will be in the future as well.
Indeed, and that's what's upset so many people, I think. But it's interesting because Trump, yeah, he doesn't seem to identify his own presidency with previous American presidencies, does he? He doesn't see any continuity between his presidency and like Biden's or Obama's or Bush's or whatever. I think he's like a completely clean slate. So he doesn't. This is why, like, usually an American president would acknowledge all of the favors and acts of friendship that have come from Canada towards the United States, like, helping them when they invoked Article 5
Yeah.
of the NATO Constitution or whatever it is in the Afghan War, and then Canada went and helped. You'd think things like that would count for something, but to Trump it almost seems like it doesn't because that happened it was almost like another country. It wasn't the US
And like I said,
in from his perspective.
the chatter out there is that we're a WEF led nation, and he's relating it to what they just did with Biden. So I think a lot of that stuff is spilling out onto us, and I think we need an election in the worst way. The NDP canceled that $1,000 grocery rebate. That, remember, they promised that when they were running against John Rustad and said they would get the money in British Columbians' hands faster than John Rustad would, and they were mocking John Rustad and said that his plan for housing relief and that would take too long, and that the BC NDP would have that money in your hands immediately. And then they never sat Parliament, and they still haven't gone back. I think they go back on the 19th, do they not?
I believe that's right. Yeah.
And there
I
you
haven't
go.
I haven't thought about that date, but I think that is right, yeah.
And then so people were waiting for that $1,000 check because they figured they were going to get it on the 19th, the day it went back to legislature. And there you go, Brenda Bailey. I've interviewed her in the past too. She basically came out and front run it and said, not getting it, and blamed Trump. So they got somebody to blame for it. But maybe they should look at the BC budget and all the, our revenues are way down, and a lot of it has to do with our resources. So if anybody's interested in going and take a look at that, that might be a good idea. Our per capita in BC is down. The only growth in BC is in the public sector.
Yeah, and they've said they're not going to hire anyone else now. And also, actually, EB said he's going to slim the public service down, didn't he? I've just looked now, and it's actually the 18th of February, so Tuesday next week is when the Legislative Assembly reopens. But yeah, I mean, it's just this is why people talk a lot about how crucial democracy is, and particularly faith in democracy, don't they? You hear that all the time, how crucial it is that the people believe in democracy. What do you think this does? Promising people $1,000 like a real amount, like a pretty serious amount of money, which a lot of people might have been actually depending on this year,
Yeah.
promising that many, many, many
Some
times.
people already spent
And
it
then
probably. Some people already
maybe,
spent
yeah,
it.
that's
Put it on their credit card
very,
already.
that's possible, yeah, even likely, I'd say in some cases. But imagine making that. That was like one of their headline policies going into this election.
Yeah.
Made this promise and then just stop talking about it. That's what happened first. They were asked
Yeah.
questions and just kept mumbling, like they
And that was
wouldn't
before
answer. They're
Trump.
like, "Oh, well, we're looking at that, we're looking at that," and then just cancel it and
And that
blame
was
the president of the United States. I mean, it's like that's not going to encourage people to believe in
yeah.
democracy, is it?
Because that nonsense was prior to Trump, right? So they can't now they just have a convenient scapegoat for it, right? As opposed to, they were like dragging their feet on it, and then all of a sudden they found an excuse, and this is it. And again, they bought an election, and then they turned their back on the people again. How many times do you need to learn the same lesson?
Yeah, but also how many times does the political class in democratic countries have to learn this lesson? That you can't just keep doing this. You can't keep betraying voters and then expect them to have respect for democracy and to look at democracy as this kind of like sacrosanct, holy thing. That's not going to happen. If it, I don't know how many more times the like democratic countries and populations in democratic countries can swallow a betrayal like this, How many more acts of betrayal can they be expected to swallow? And then still, like when the time comes, get out there and wave the flag for democracy and how brilliant it is. I just think it's so irresponsible.
Yeah. We have some good stuff coming at the end here, so I advise people to kind of hang in there. And somebody said that they had their 3 children took French immersion. My daughter was in French immersion as well. So a lot of people take advantage of French immersion. Um,
It's still
this,
not anywhere near widespread enough to call Canada like properly bilingual, though, I would say.
um, and then this story out of Kelowna, we did it. Steve McDonald did it. Why BC tech workers are facing a grim job market. I took that photo, by the way. Look at that, eh? There you go.
Very nice
Um,
sunset.
yeah.
Is it a
It's been
sunset actually, or is that a
yeah,
sunrise?
it's been enhanced for sure, but enhanced sunset. There you go. I took that a long time ago. But it's tougher and tougher for tech workers now, right? Ever since 2022, with the high raise in interest rates, it's tougher and tougher for people to find jobs. And then there's a global competition now for jobs, especially for tech people in that too. So instead of like going into the office, a lot of these people are working remotely, so they can hire people. I think Mark Zuckerberg said that. He said you can work from home, but now recognize that you compete on the world market.
Brutal. But I
Jamie
mean,
Dimon.
it's not just the world market. It's not just people in like India and the Philippines that they're competing with. They're
No.
also now competing with AI, aren't they? Which is possibly even scarier.
Jamie Dimon just came out and said, I posted on my LinkedIn, I don't give a F or whatever. Come back to the office or be done. Yeah. He wasn't pulling any punches. They've had enough. And they said that just so much inefficiencies and different things like that. So,
Well, you can see though as well why a lot of people didn't want to be in the office.
yeah.
Certainly in places where like Jamie Dimon is likely to be working, like Manhattan, you can see why people didn't want to go to Manhattan because to be in Manhattan, you had to have, and it's not absolutely no exaggeration to say, like really substandard living standards. You had to like accept that you were never going to own your own home. You're going to live in a tiny, possibly shared, apartment, and you're not really going to be able to save any money. Also, that you can be at the service of Jamie Dimon, who lives
Well,
presumably somewhere like the Hamptons in a
to,
$20 million mansion.
to be fair to the traders at JP Morgan, most of them make enough money to afford whatever they need to afford. But yeah, I
Well,
understand their
even I
point.
mean the salary to live. I
Yeah,
can't remember the last time I read this was a while ago, but the salary needed to have like a high standard of living and live in New York City is enormous. It's
crazy,
astronomical.
crazy.
It's like hundreds of thousands of dollars.
It's almost like
So
Kelowna.
even if they are doing all right, I mean,
Eh?
there are a lot of traders who don't earn that much money
Yeah.
actually, and so yeah, I would say that it still applies to old Diamond's firm.
The markets, gold, again, like kind of like banging around in that number, 2,900, fell off a little bit today. Bitcoin, again, just chopping in that range. And then our friend dollar. Again, the dollar is saying that the dollar's not believing in the tariffs. So there you go. That's what the markets are saying. I think the markets are saying there's going to be an election.
Or maybe it's also a reaction to all of the talk on being pro natural resources all of a sudden.
But I don't hear that talk on pro natural resources coming from most of the liberals. They're avoiding that the words oil and gas and LNG.
Well, I'm hearing it from the actual ministers now who are in power.
Mm-hmm.
Wilkinson, and then obviously Freeland, but I mean, I don't know how many people believe that she's
Yeah.
going to be the next leader. But I mean, even Carney has conceded the point in his own way, hasn't he? That
Sounds
it's
like
important to get natural
from the
resources out there.
from the speeches I've heard, he's going to build Canada's economy to get ahead of the Americans, and it'll be all investing in green technologies. And if you pull up a map of Brookfield Resources there and look at all the green projects across Canada, just have a look. Here's some really
He
sad
loves the
news.
green.
Here's some really sad news for Canada. Barrick, considering redomiciling from Canada to the U.S., one of Canada's storied companies. And this article was in the Globe and Mail. This has become one of the largest gold producers in the world, headquartered in Toronto. Huge company, huge importance to Canada. And, like the recent changes in taxes and all kinds of things, and also the open door program that Donald Trump has said to these companies with lots of money, like come to the US and we'll make it really easy for you. So losing Barrick Gold to the US would be a major blow to Canada economically, politically, and culturally. It will result in job losses, tax revenue, and shift in control over our own natural resources, because Barrick owns a lot of mines. And although a lot of them happen to be in other countries too, again, because of our current environment, hard to get mines in Canada. It's Barrick, an amazing company and an amazing, great Canadian company, and another one that says, like that it's not that good to invest in Canada. And we've seen that. We talked about it, I think, about 6 months ago. Canfor, again, a great British Columbian company that closed its mill in Bear Lake, cut its planned expansion in Houston, and cut shifts in Prince George, and said that BC is not a viable place to do business.
Well, there are consequences to how you arrange your tax system and how your planning system and all the rest of it. It's not all just like utopianism, and it's like, yes, we should do this, and we should make sure that we save this particular finch that lives in this valley or something. It's like it's not all as easy as it's presented to be,
No. There's
presented as
people
being, is it? Like there are real consequences, and the main one is you lose out on money, really, don't you? You lose out on business.
there's people there that'll say what we're saying right now, the both of us, is dangerous to Canada, because we shouldn't be talking down Canada. Also, we should just continue down this path of like economic disaster, just because you feel like the liberals are telling you that, like they've done in the past, that you weren't supposed to criticize Tiff Macklin for his disastrous interest rate policies. That basically is like raising interest rates when he told Canadians that to rest assured and go ahead and invest, and then raise interest rates 19 times. And you weren't allowed to criticize him for that. Just ridiculous. How do we
Well,
get
Mark
better?
Carney is accused of similar, isn't he, with his nickname that was given to him by a Labour MP in Britain of being an unreliable boyfriend because he didn't provide enough kind of a steer to businesses and the government actually about his decisions when it came
And
to interest rate rises.
and here's our Valentine's to you, and it's delivered by Optimus. Like the new AI world, Optimus will be bringing you a bouquet of flowers with love. Basically saying he's going to replace you, and here's some flowers. Have a good day. That's a joke, but yeah, there you go. There's Optimus with flowers. Who doesn't want flowers?
I can't imagine robots have much use for flowers, to be honest.
Well, he's going to gift them to you.
Just selfless.
In our EV news, Kelowna battery pack assembler lays off 40% of its workforce amid American uncertainty. And then we've done a lot of stories on this too. Hexagon Purus in Kelowna here. They're a trucking outfit that builds electric trucks and batteries and stuff like that. So they're saying it sounded like the Daimler trucks in North that this contract was already kind of like leaving. So I'm not sure if they just used this to pull the pin or just said that there was no chance of recovery. But this seems like an early reaction, and then maybe it was just a way to blame something. But a big cut on their workforce.
Yeah, and I mean, Kelowna on that, I can't remember who did it, but Kelowna was, oh, it was the Chamber of Commerce, wasn't it? Canadian Chamber of Commerce ranked Kelowna as one of the sort of least affected by the tariff situation, but maybe still having a negative effect.
And then, oops, I don't know what happened there. Battery prices dropping. I got to find myself here. Battery prices, that's the price of batteries. That's why EVs are getting cheaper and cheaper. In China, they're $94 a kilowatt, and that's in the Europe and the US, that's still 31 to 48% more expensive still in Europe. And then so as those prices come down, look at that price decline on batteries, which is one of the most expensive things in EVs, right? So that's a huge decline.
I mean, is that just for EVs or is that also for solar reserve power?
Yeah, no, it's for battery packs. Yeah, for batteries in general, right? Lithium ion battery
Right.
prices. Yeah, so
Because that's
batteries
quite
get
positive for solar farms and whatnot,
yeah,
isn't it?
solar farms, battery packs, mega packs, all those things, right? So there's places in Hawaii. I think that one of the small islands is actually all on solar now and mega packs, like on storage, right? So, and we got a bunch of memes for you today here. We got the first one here. Rommel. There you go. There's your first meme. Make what you
But
want
it's
of
a
that.
different Donald, that wasn't it? He looks a lot different. Actually, so does Trudeau. He
Yeah,
looks a bit more youthful.
yeah. And then this is Jagmeet Singh like going on his attacks, and he said he was going to hell to pay for Trump, but this one is he's targeting Elon Musk and said that he's going to cut off the supply of critical minerals for Teslas, slap 100% tariff on Teslas, and give Canadians a $10,000 rebate for Canadian EVs. I mean, he has no power to do any of this stuff, but other than he's really good at virtue signaling. Like he's been really good at that, right?
Well, is it virtue? Is that virtuous, would you say?
I don't know. I guess he's our Canadian AOC.
Yeah, I guess so. Something like that. I mean, he's obviously appeals to about 15% of the or 15% of the electorate, let's say, roughly. So there's obviously a market for that kind of thing, isn't there? But I don't know. I mean, it doesn't seem to worry the Americans very much, does it?
Now we just have a few memes that were stacked in here. I don't know, like we can do them here, but we'll just go through them quickly. Chrystia Freeland put out a tweet there. She put up a picture of Pierre that looks like I think she might have edited that photo, but Pierre looks a little old in that photo there.
I think I think that was like a long shot on Pierre, and ISO is up really high probably, and it's like a bit blurry, but obviously it does look like a very tired 1920s silent film star, I
And there's
think.
our friend Ruby. She's got the meme she's the memer. She's gonna take over the United States. It's gonna join Canada as the 11th province or 4th territory. I think we could give them more than territory status for sure, right? Like provincial status at a minimum.
Well, I mean that raises an interesting point though. Why does he keep saying 51st state? Like, even if this was remotely serious, or rather, if it was remotely serious, it would obviously be at least 60th state, wouldn't it? It would include all the provinces. There's no way that the Quebec and Ontario would
It's because he's
join
not
together as
serious.
one state.
He's just
Exactly, yeah.
he's messing with us, and it's driving some people absolutely bananas. And
Yeah, that's one of the many indications that it's not even
Yeah,
Not
it's
at
like
least now. It's not a serious proposition now. Like I think it might be a serious idea to an extent, but it's not being looked at as a serious policy or anything like that.
it's like a feather, and we're the cat, and he keeps dangling this feather, and we're jumping and flopping all over the place, chasing this feather.
Yeah.
And then we had to show this when the Liberal Party put up a Valentine's for you. There you go. Roses are red, violets are blue. It seems disingenuous to put up a love message at the same time talking about cutting people. Seems disingenuous, no? That's got to be the worst Valentine's card ever. No?
That one's
Valentine's
that,
was supposed to be about love. I don't see a lot of love in that, right? Do you?
well, they're saying that the Liberals love you. They're the only ones that care about you, apparently.
Yeah, but if you read the first message, not so much, right? So not
That's Pierre.
so
That's
much.
nasty Pierre. They're trying to fix his tie. It's funny how as well they select the images of him when he's wearing his glasses. Because he obviously had a makeover, didn't he? Where he decided to wear contacts and change his hair and everything to try and look cooler, I suppose. But the Liberals keep going back to the days of his glasses, which is very anti-glasses of the Liberals, I think.
There you go. We made it through, cold and all. So didn't break down coughing throughout the show. So that's it for the week. Again, you can follow us on Kelowna Now. We have a newsletter that goes out 365 days a year before 7 o'clock, ends up in your inbox. And Ian and I do this show every morning around 8 to 9 o'clock. We start. It's around an hour-long show. And sometimes we go longer because we just love to chat about what's going on in the world, right? So you're not going to get this story load on Kelowna Now. This is more about like the 5 things, kind of an expansion of 5 things. We talk about more things that are going on around the world and in provincially and nationally and stuff like that, as opposed to the local stuff. There is some local stories in here, but if you're looking for the local stuff, head to KelownaNow.com and all the local stuff's right there. Any final thoughts there, Ian?
Do I have any final thoughts? I mean, I would say it's the usual final thought, which is continue to observe the unpredictable White House and all the mad things that come out of there.
How about this
And
for a final thought?
let's hope that we get another reprieve, at least another
How about,
month-long reprieve.
how about this for a final thought? We love you, the readers, and we love the Americans, and we hope that you find it in your heart to stop toying with us and treat us with the respect that you at least treated India with. And that would be a good start, that we start with respectful negotiations as opposed to taunting us and getting all this negativity out there and basically throwing our economy into turmoil and stressing out a lot of people. Love is in the air. Happy Valentine's Day. And we do thank you for watching Kelowna Now.
We don't just report the news, we live here too. We're your neighbors, bringing you stories that matter to all of us. No government funding, no outside influence. Kelowna Now, local, independent. News you can trust.